Okay, so this is our last event of the day today before the reception. Very excited for this event. This is our practitioners panel for this year. So every year we have a practitioners panel that brings together different folks that work in industry, sort of talking about the practitioner's perspective on different matters related to experimentation. In past years, this has been a panel that is comprised of software engineers or data scientists or product managers who are thinking about the very technical aspects of experimentation that we discuss in a lot of the plenary and parallel sessions, thinking about bias and estimators, confidence intervals, new experiment designs, things of that sort. The focus of this year's practitioners panel is going to be a little bit different in that we have a panel consisting of designers that work at different firms. And so we're going to be talking largely about the design of experimentation platforms and other experimentation-related products that are actually sort of experienced by end users that are perhaps much less technical than the typical code attendee. And so, the way that people make decisions based on the way that information is provided to them in these tools is actually quite consequential in terms of thinking about how experimentation is actually used in the field. So I think this panel is about an hour long. We'll spend maybe 30 minutes or so discussing a few questions that I have prepared here. And then we will open it up to folks in the audience. So I'd encourage you to come up with some good questions for our esteemed panelists here. One thing I want to note before I get into introductions and get started, particularly relevant for the practitioners panel every year, is of course these are the opinions of these folks on the panel and not necessarily the firms that they work for. So keep that in mind when interpreting things they say and thinking through who those views should be attributed to. All right, so without further ado, let me get started. So first, let me introduce the panelists here. So we have Antara Dave from Microsoft, Rina Chang from Netflix, that's in the wrong order, Hung Lei from Eppo, and then Joni Rustulka from LaunchDarkly. So I think one thing that's neat about this panel is we have folks that work on tools that are internal to particular firms, so that's Rina and Antara. And then we have folks that are working on tools that are actually sort of sold to other companies in the case of LaunchDarkly and Eppo. So we kind of have a mixture of different types of tools, and I'm assuming, although I don't know, we'll learn over the course of this panel, that that brings with it differences in the types of design considerations that go into designing these tools. All right, so the first question I had for you all is, as I mentioned earlier, by and large, the audience here at Code is extremely technical. We're talking about things like confidence intervals, bias, things of these nature. But even people in this room probably don't want to think about all these considerations every single time that we run an experiment. That's the point of building experimentation platforms. And then if we think about it, there's much less technical people that are consuming the results that come out in these experimentation platforms. So I'm curious, how do you all think about this when you're actually designing experimentation tools? So how do you ensure that different audiences can interpret the output that's being produced by these tools and actually make the right decisions? How do you think about sort of trading off between complexity of information provided and showing something that's right? Obviously, lots to dig into here. So happy to have any of you just start at the start somewhere, and we'll work our way through it. I don't know, Hung, maybe you have any thoughts?
Sure. I look like I have thoughts. So by the way, hi again. I'm Hang. I lead design at Eppo. So two examples come to mind as you talk about how do we make the technical things easier to understand for people who don't have a science background, especially like having a PhD. One is, for example, at Eppo we learned that people don't understand confidence interval. They also don't understand MDE. The time that we told them that, hey, these are the things that you should care about when you plan your, they just go like, what? So there was a thing that we decided to do is called this progress bar. It was basically say, MDE is more important when you plan an experiment to think about how long you need to plan it. And then when you are looking at an experiment, the thing that, let's say, a PM care about is, how much more do I have? Like how much longer do I need to run? And can I ship this thing, right? Is the two most important question. So we decided that we need to take something that is easily understood which is a bar with a progress that just fill up, did you reach the precision that you need to reach? And then basically just wait until the bars go up. And then once it reaches precision, and then you can see that your experiment, the metrics that you have is significant, then it just has this green confetti that is on the metric. No, I'm serious. It's a confetti with an animation that's celebrating, hey, your primary metric has reached significant, and it's within the precision that it wants to reach. You can launch it now.
What happens
so it's that
when
simple.
It's not? What happens when it's not statistically significant? Is there
so there are two cases, right? One is when it did increase, but it did not reach significant, and then there's a case when, like, it actually decreased. So in the decrease stage, assuming that the decrease is what you don't want to see, then it's red. And then when it doesn't have significant, or we also kind of try to prevent people from peaking, then we gray out, kind of like it has a gray background. So then just very simple from like, everybody understand the traffic light, right? There's green, there's red, there's yellow. So we use the same colors.
I'm guessing that these considerations might be more extreme at Eppo, given that you're selling to a wide range of clients. I guess I'm curious at Netflix or Microsoft, is this roughly similar, or?
Do you actually block people from peaking? Like before that it reaches that date, you don't?
You can still peak, but because it's gray, it's kind of like hinting that you shouldn't
Even
look
if like the confidence interval is above the axis, you don't color it?
No.
Oh.
Until it's significant.
Until it reaches
the date
yeah.
that has passed.
I think our users would just like have a riot if we didn't let them do that. Like, because I mean, yeah, you don't want peaking obviously, but there's a lot of times when it's so stat sig so early on, and they're like, wait, do we just not have enough sample size, or do I need to shut this test off like now? And sometimes it's one, and sometimes it's actually the other. And so it's whenever we run our data, if it's above, it's green. If it's below, well, depending on the direction of the metric. But I think if we joked about, just like blocking out the whole screen and saying like, hey, you still have 14 more days, not allowed to look at this yet. And I think our users would there'd be pitchforks.
Yeah. And I think the key thing is also, design is used to we're trying to steer people to the right thing, right? And I also find that a lot of the time, you can't really stop people from doing the thing they want to, they're going to do what they want to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in design choices, we can try to kind of course correct.
I guess one question is like, do either, I'm not sure, like, do either of these platforms use things like anytime valid confidence intervals to kind of like
with Bayesian and stuff, or like when you turn Cupid on and it's suddenly significant, we do tell people in those cases.
Yeah, so I guess some of these things might help, in terms of how much do we worry about peaking and how to prevent people from peaking. So that's one thing that might help in these cases. Any other sort of like approaches? Yeah.
When we approach design for an experimentation platform, we always think from a data scientist point of view, because it's the concept or the whole technical side of it is all based on data science. So there's a bias when we try to design for people who are product managers or business analysts or data analysts. They all might not have the similar level of expertise. So how can we not over-index on specifically just somebody who is technical savvy versus somebody who is novice? So how I think of it is having some sort of progressive disclosure, showing information as they learn and as they get better at it. You expose them to more advanced technologies of running an experiment. And that's what we currently do at Microsoft as well.
Can you give me, like, out of curiosity, like, what's an example of what that looks like in practice?
So there are different types of experiments that users would like to run. If I'm a very new person on our team, and let's say if Microsoft has a new product that they're launching and they want to start running experiments to understand how it's performing, and I'm a new person on that product and I want to run experiments, then I might not know exactly how to run an experiment. So the first set of experiment is a very simple experiment, like an A experiment or a simple AB experiment. And once learn how to run a basic experiment and learn how to create basic metrics and learn how to just understand, okay, this is how I read results. That's when you get to the next level where you can start using code or intents like metrics, creating more intense metrics.
Got it. Makes sense. Joni, it looks like you.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting just from the practice of UX that we're often dealing with these kinds of situations where complexity is a natural part of the system that we're designing. So experimentation is not necessarily new in that regard, and we do have techniques. Progressive disclosure is one of them. So an example of what progressive disclosure can mean is only presenting information to the user when they request that information. So we've seen this in LaunchDarkly, where if it's a product manager who is maybe a novice experimenter, they're confused or have expressed they don't want to see a credible interval. They don't want to see relative difference from control. I don't understand what that means. And so what we did is we kind of played with this idea of, could we put that information behind a tab so that if maybe a data scientist is looking for that information, then they can find it. Other methods of progressive disclosure that we've used is actually within the design of experiments. So sometimes what you do is you break up complex tasks into smaller complex tasks as a way of guiding the user through how to do it. So we do that within our experiment builder, that we require that you set up a hypothesis and then you set up your metrics. And all of this is really trying to help educate the user about what you need in order to create a valid experiment, such that when you're looking at results, you can trust that the metrics that you've selected will potentially be valid. So there's a lot of these kinds of techniques that I've seen used in multiple experimentation platforms. But to me, it's not necessarily net new for experimentation. I think the thing for me that I've had to pay closer attention to is my subject matter experts that I work with at LaunchDarkly to help me understand the depth of data science that is not my specialty. So I do need to understand the statistical methodology. I need to be able to translate that to users. And again, sort of progressive disclosure or educating while operating in a system is what you say is you can do things with hints in UI. So if you say, I don't understand what credible interval means, we can do a little popover. And if you need to learn what that is initially, then over time, you might read that, you might not read it. But there's all these kinds of techniques. Sometimes you push users to documentation, but there's a range of things that you do. But for me, fundamentally, it's about know who might be using the thing at the time that they're using it. So is it a developer the first time an experiment is run? What do they need to know at that time? Is it a product manager who wants to make a decision? What do they need to know to make a decision? And how do you show those different states in the UI at different times?
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it's a great segue into the next question I had prepared also, which is I don't know, based on these responses, it might sound like, this is a pretty easily solvable problem, just do progressive disclosure, some of these old design tricks that I did not know about before 5 minutes ago, and then we can build good A/B testing tools. Of course, I'm sure it's more complex than that. So I'm assuming that all of you in the course of designing these tools have encountered different types of trade-offs, for instance, maybe between the usability of the tool and the complexity of the information that you show, or making it really interactive versus kind of trying to keep it intuitive. I'm wondering if you all can share some examples of cases where you did have to make a challenging trade-off like that, and sort of how a designer goes about navigating those types of trade-offs. Maybe we can start down here and just work our way down the line.
Sure. So one of the examples that I can think of is there are multiple different user groups in Microsoft, and each user group has different types of needs. For example, if they want to see analysis, information about the analysis, like experiment ID or description of the experiment and results, one-click button to the results of the experiments, they want to see everything. Some users want to see these 4 things. Some other users want to see these other 5 things, and there's always a Venn diagram between different users, and we have to understand where's this intersection. And then also listening to the users as to what do they really, after this, where are they coming from on this page? And after this page, where are they going to go? So having that sort of understanding from a user standpoint helps in making that sort of trade-off as to, okay, these are the things that we should have common between all the users, and these are some things that we can hide beneath a collapsible menu, or let them have filterable options or searchable options. So these are some of the techniques or examples that I have encountered at Microsoft.
Got it. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll talk about maybe a big decision that we made about the unification or the separation of flagging and experimentation. So you will find in a lot of platforms, they would do either there's a set of features for the normal flags, things like, I just want to roll out a feature, or like I just want to do a kill switch, or I just want to do a very simple true or false. And then there's the flag that you use for your experimentation. And fundamentally, they are very different. One is kind of like a little bit more static, so to say, right? And then the other one is going through, there's a workflow around the flag, because there's like, in a lot of companies, you're not going to run an experiment on production 50-50 to 100% of your traffic. Like, that doesn't happen, right? It always have to start with, you do an internal test, maybe you do for like the people who are open to doing the test, and then you put it into a staging environment, you do a little bit there, and then you put it onto production, and then you do a little bit there. So the thing that, in the beginning, when we were designing our flags, we thought like, well, should it be with the analysis piece, or should it be by its own piece? So this is talking about architecture, information architecture of like where things should fall. And when we talk to engineers, to them, they need a way to understand holistically what is being shown to my users. So from their standpoint, flags are all the same. But from a data scientist perspective, they almost only care about the flag that is running experimentation. So then we are in a dilemma of, well, where do we put it? Do we put it with the analysis, or do we put it with the flagging piece? And a decision that we made was that in order to maximize the amount of control that an engineer needs, since it's very important for an engineer, no engineer wants to ever be known as the person who do not know what needs to be shut off to their users so that they have the right experience, right? So we decided, in order to optimize for the engineering use case, we decided to put flags and experimentation and all the kind of flags together, rather than splitting it into like the analysis portion. And it's like has a trade-off.
We have the perennial issue of balancing complexity and functionality with ease of use. And oftentimes, because we have a lot of data scientists at Netflix who are using our tools, they are asking us, oh, I want to be able to do this, I want to be able to do that, I want to put these different adjustments or corrections in, I want to build these metrics, or we have the feature flagging tools as well. And so you can give everybody the ability to do so many things, but of course then the UI becomes more and more complex. And as somebody's looking at the UI, they're like, well, I don't understand what this is, I don't understand what that is, and you have pages upon pages of forms just to fill out and set up a single test. And so the balance that we have to figure out is, okay, for your particular test, because we support a lot of verticals, right? We all test things slightly differently at Netflix. For your test, what are the most reasonable defaults for you, which maybe is this set of bits, and for your test, maybe you have a completely different set of bits that makes sense for you. So we have a platform that needs to support all of this functionality, but then trying to put a layer on top of that that is much more user-friendly for whoever you are and is exactly which type of test you are. And so what we have essentially at this point is we're trying to make that path more paved, but we're also working really closely with our expert data scientists who understand both the business vertical requirements as well as the experimentation requirements, and they set up essentially what you could call templates or presets for their testing areas. So people who are instantiating tests there know, well, I could just, I'm running this type of test, I'm just gonna hit start. And they don't have to know, those users don't have to know basically anything about experimentation. They only need to know their domain information in order to run these tests, and that between us and their domain expert data scientists, like we can figure out what are the best standards for you. So whether that's turning on corrections, anytime valid, you can call your test in 2 hours, you can call your test in 31 days, whatever that is, building that into basically the UI and making it easy for people to know kind of just don't fall off the path because this is the right thing for you.
Interesting, yeah. I think these are all really diverse. The one that I'll sort of tag onto is the one that makes my blood boil the most. And it's very specifically a UI design choice that I still stand by, which is how information of a leading variation is actually shared. So we, or I very consciously said, there are no trophies, there are no confettis. This is at a certain threshold, we can tell you with some level of confidence, but still a degree of uncertainty, that this is the leading variation. But it was interesting because there's obviously many stakeholders that are involved with a product that you're selling to customers. There's your customers who want a particular thing. There's internal stakeholders that want to be able to sell the product. And so there was a lot of this, just make it easier for me to know which one was the winner. And there was actually a data scientist who I worked with who actually is sitting here today, and he said, these are estimates, Joni, they are not guarantees. And that was kind of one of the things that I held on to there, which is there's always a degree of uncertainty that you have, I believe you have an obligation to share with users so that they don't make a decision that they think this is gonna, in the future, this is guaranteed to be the winner forever and always. And so that's kind of the concept. And in minor ways, this is no trophies, use of color green in like kind of nuanced ways of directing people to the information they should pay attention to as opposed to indicating winner. So that for me is probably the one that's the most ongoing, and it has been probably the most difficult because I think that there's this desire to just tell me which one is the winner, whether you can or you can't. So there's always a continual debate there.
Got it. That makes sense. I'm gonna try to start a fight, I guess. But like,
yeah,
I think
do it. Start a fight.
I think you said, I guess there is confetti at Eppo, and so I'm curious if there was a similar debate about the existence or lack thereof of confetti in the Eppo tooling, or how you all thought about that, like the level of certainty to sort of communicate to an end user.
Yeah. So what I would say is for us, the confetti is based on the confidence interval and the MDA that was set to the experiment. So in a sense, the user already told us what risk they are okay with. So the confetti is telling them based on the risk that you have told us you are okay with, this is what is winning.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah. So only confetti according to the pre-specified.
It doesn't. To be clear, it doesn't just do confetti on anything. Confetti means the metric is moving to the direction that you want it to move, and it is significant.
Yeah, I do have to say that I'm disappointed that the Eppo dashboard doesn't show something comparable when it's a bad result, like where.
Yeah, because we're like, people are already down. Do we want to bid them with,
Light a candle in remembrance of this variant, which will not be launched and never seen again, something like that.
I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's a thing that I've observed with some of our users, which is that a treatment that performs worse than the control is a losing experiment. And that's not actually true. I think that for a lot of users, they just like the fact that they're learning. And so there's this attribution that there was a recent customer that came through and they were evaluating the platform. They had run one experiment and the treatment was 99% likely to be worse than the control. And they spent over 100K on the platform on that one experiment. And it was a loser if you looked at it that way. But like, there's this thing that you have to sort of balance. If you were to look at your list of experiments and all you saw were losers, would you say that you didn't get value out of the platform that you were using? Probably not, right? Like, you still got value out of doing the experiment. And so there's this semantics that you have to pay attention to around what winning and losing actually means.
Yeah. So actually, because of that, I'm sorry, I'm going on a tangent.
Yeah.
So because of that, we built this thing called a scorecard.
Yeah.
Basically stemming from the idea that, well, the value that you get is not from having 100% win.
Right.
That means you're not taking any risk. It means you're just like, maybe somebody just wants to be promoted.
Yeah.
So we made this thing stemming from the idea that, well, companies need a way to understand the quality of their experimentation program. And in the beginning, I started with maybe it's velocity, right? Like, you run faster, you learn more. And then when we talk to the customer, and by the way, the learning, if anything, you take away is talk to your users. So when we talk to our users, I learned that velocity is relative to the people that you have and the resources that you have. So a larger team is going to run faster. That doesn't tell you if the tool is giving you value. So then we anchor on two things. One is the quality as a whole of the experiment that you run. So say, did it have a hypothesis? Did you ship the thing that was successful, or did you fudge your number? You know, did you look at all the guardrails, right? That kind of a thing for quality. And then there's we define that a range of win and fails. So basically, if you fall within that range, then you're taking appropriate risks, but not like losing all the time. Yeah. And then like basically velocity, that quality of the experiment, and kind of like, you know, are you falling in this range, not like extreme? It's kind of how we try to counteract the, you know, are you winning all the time thing.
Yeah. I like that. I think one of the things I like about that is that it sort of helps to mature an experimentation program or culture over time.
Yeah.
And there's a lot about that that's really great. I remember talking to one of our users who is very mature experimentation organization, senior leader in a product role, and he expressed to me that he thinks that if 100% of your experiments are winners, you're not trying hard enough. If none of your experiments are winners, you should probably get fired. And if a third of them are, his sweet spot was about a third were, and so he understood very well that he should see a balance of winning and losing. But did he know that initially? No, and it could be something like a scorecard that helps to inform an organization over time. I think it's a great idea.
We have a experimentation review that happens every year of all of the experiments that have happened at Netflix. Mm-hmm. And like, so if you're talking about programs, right, like the product team, their tests, probably the growth team, their tests, there's a bunch of different ones that we have, and you cannot compare them against each other. It's just, it's really not fair. Like, trying to increase members' streaming hours, like, you know, how much they watch, is a really hard needle to move versus something like sign up. Sure. Right? Those are just, you just can't compare them, right? And so the first thing that they say whenever this review happens is, this is not a scorecard about, well, not to say the wrong word, but you know, it's not about like if this program is winning, right, or losing. It's about the learnings that we have here, and like what can we learn from that to build and iterate for the next time, right? And there was a concept at Netflix a while ago, I don't know if they still use it, but they talk about mountain tests. Versus like little swings, so they really want to go for the ones that are going to give you like the really big swings, and then figure out, okay, is there a local maximum over here, or are we like, you know, find another mountain, right? So yeah, I think there's definitely a balance in the culture of figuring out like you need to be taking a lot of swings, right? Which ones are worth your time, because as you know, like constrained, right? You can't build every single thing that you want to test. So what are the ones that you want to pick in order to test those, right? Yeah, and trying to put your money there, I guess.
I'd like to add to that we have crawl, walk, run, and fly methodology at Microsoft. So as a designer, I always think of what can be the best ideal solution for this. But because the users have been the experimentation platform at Microsoft has been so mature that changing anything has to be done incrementally, and changing something drastically can be very jarring to the users. So having that incremental modifications in the design where the user learn and gets used to it, and then you make new changes, and then that's how you progress and make the design more modern and more accessible. That's how there are trade-offs like, yeah.
Cool. I think that this is starting, the next question I had planned is actually starting to kind of organically emerge in this conversation, which is great. Hopefully it's not already entirely answered, in which case me asking it is dumb. Like one thing that's interesting about these experimentation tools is that they, in some sense, are a codification of the culture that like a company is trying to create around decision making, use of data, like use of experimentation. Like we've already kind of seen, to what extent do we want to celebrate like a variant winning? Like that's a very different way to think about experimentation. Do we think about learning and just number of experiments run and throughput? Like how are we thinking about uncertainty, things like that? I guess I'm curious how you all think about designing these tools and what it means in terms of the culture that you're trying to sort of create or promote within a firm. And I think I am curious specifically with Chang and with Joni, like I think designing these tools for many firms is a little bit interesting because presumably they all maybe have different types of cultures that they want to build around experimentation. And so to what extent does a company like Eppo or LaunchDarkly kind of impose a culture onto all their clients versus trying to be flexible and kind of accommodate the different cultures that their clients might want to build around the tool. So really interested both in like all the individual answers, but maybe in the contrast between these different types of tools. So I don't know if anyone has a great answer to that. But
sure, yeah, I can start. We do not impose any cultural philosophies on our customers, and that may actually be a mistake. It could be. I think that one of the things that we've seen with uptake of the LaunchDarkly tool is that unless there's an already well-established experimentation culture, it can look like it doesn't have the degree of adoption that we would hope for a regular product. So that's when all these conversations around, does this thing actually have product market fit? Is this actually a problem with what the product is doing? And maybe we could be more opinionated in there in order to help our customers to establish their culture of experimentation. But the thing I'll say that we have observed, or that I have observed, is that the culture of experimentation does progress over time, even from those that start off as novices. And it is a relatively short period of time. I think for me, I've seen within the realm of 2 to 3 successful experiments meaning they were able to select a metric that was right, it gave them some set of results, and they were able to make some set of decisions, then it was successful. They're starting to learn that this is actually providing them value. So this is definitely happening. I think some of the things that I've seen is that users love to share their results, and that's a cultural sort of forming at organizations. So a lot of times we see what our customers will do is actually take screenshots of the results pages and then end up putting them into PowerPoint or deck presentations to be able to share with their leadership and others. What that tends to do is inform future features that we could include in our product, where it's like, well, if they're sharing that and they're taking screenshots, what are ways that we could actually help to inform that or to make that easier for them. But I'll sort of end there and say that we don't really say this is how you should establish a culture, and maybe we should.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose even the decision to not to like make this a panel about confetti, but like that does seem like like a cultural decision a little bit, right? Like how do we process what's a successful experiment, and how do we think about uncertainty?
Yeah.
It's to some extent like a cultural value, I suppose, right?
I'd say, or it's a philosophy. Yeah. That's definitely a philosophy that's embedded in the system that we've designed thus far, and I believe in it. Yeah.
I think it's a defensible philosophy.
It's a very neutral stance.
I wouldn't call it neutral so much as that it's not trying to give false confidence where confidence doesn't truly exist. So I don't know that that's neutral so much as impartial, potentially. Maybe they're the same thing.
Yeah, we have totally the opposite. So it's really funny that now that I talk to Joni, I'm like, yeah, there's a different way of doing things, right?
Yeah.
So for Eppo, I would say in my design experience, I find that in order for the experimentation program to succeed, there are two components to it. There's people's motivation, and then there's the ability of people to run experiment very quickly, right? So motivation means, do you feel good wanting to do it, or like the moment that you want to test anything, your leadership immediately go like, no, don't test that, or like they're like, no, you've been spending time doing this thing, don't do that thing, right? So on the motivational side, what we want to make sure is that people can trust the numbers that they see in Eppo. That like whatever number you see is correct.
Yeah.
And you can, and then we work on things that show program impact. So like, the whole velocity, quality, even we recently did something very similar to, I forgot which team that was up here, that calculate the impact over time based on very complex math that I don't understand, but it can, congregate kind of, your program is giving you this much lift. So that is to give confidence to the people around the person who needs to run experiment that like, hey, this thing is producing value. So that it create motivation for that person to do more experimentations, so that it create motivation on the leadership team that like, hey, we spend money buying this thing, it actually return business value, right? So once we solve the motivational problem, then we solve the ability problem, which is how do we make it magical is what I would say, magical for an experiment to be run. And I'm drawing parallel to, how when Amazon had that one-click buying thing, nobody believed that you can do it in one click, but they did. And so for me, it was like, how do I make it so that you can run an experiment in one click? And a great idea from Jay, our CEO, was that if you can create enough rules that can govern the way that an experiment is run end to end, and we're calling it protocol for now, is like, for example, if you only need to input, if I want to do an A/B test, I just give it a name, and then it just run the test for me, and then I can tell, and I can tell the protocols to say like, here are the primary metrics I care about, here are the secondary metric I care about. Maybe it just run, and then at the end it tells me which one I should ship. And then after that, maybe there's another click to ship, I don't know. But if we could automate the very simple experimentation so that anybody, even if you don't know statistics, you can run it in, let's say 2 clicks, then we can shift people to do the more impactful, business-driven type of experimentation, right? Things like incrementality, things like maybe more geolift tests if you do any of those, more bandits as an example, right? Like shifting people to do more impactful work. And I think that is what gives data scientists a sense of achievement, because you are not doing the grunt A/B testing of a button color. You are actually driving business impact.
Got it.
And we're very opinionated about this stuff.
Yeah, super interesting. Very divergent approaches.
Yeah.
So these are, I guess, two, selling to customers type products. I guess I'm curious, like at Netflix, Rina, like how do you feel the tools that you're working on kind of, push forward or embody like the Netflix culture around experimentation and learning from data?
I feel like we have, as the platform, a lot of responsibility in actually pushing the culture forward. Because we are, one platform to rule them all. Well, not really, but like all the people at Netflix who want to experiment pretty much go through our platform. There's a few offshoots. Netflix builds things. If they can't move forward, they just build their own things. So we have a lot of homegrown stuff. But I don't remember where I was going with this. But one thing that we have is when we're sitting there in the middle of all these different verticals who want to test things differently, sometimes we're saying like, well, why are you doing it that way when they're doing it this way? Have you talked, right? Like, should you sit in a room and figure this out? And, for a while it was when we didn't have as many people in the team and we weren't quite as prominent, when we were more of like the tool status instead of a product status, it was like, hey, you should sit in a room. Okay, and then I think as we got more people, we kind of have like more of a center of gravity. I think we have had data scientists directly on the team that is pushing forward methodology. Then we kind of got a little bit more into like, okay, we want to give them a little bit more stronger like defaults, right? We want you to do things this way. We want you to get onto the same path as these other people. Netflix, I guess we are very lucky that we have a very strong culture of experimentation in the company. Our old CEO, Reed, like had, company videos, right, where he's explaining A/B testing to everyone at the company because he believes in it as a tool to make our decisions so strongly. We have multiple forums in which the results of A/B tests are debated and discussed, and like the next step is talked about. So that is all built in, thankfully. And really what it becomes is like, well, does a tool make it easy for people to achieve what they're trying to test, right? And making it obviously easy to read those results, but then also making it easy for them to do the next iteration of tests, right? The hard thing that we come up against is like we run out of people to test on, actually, because the volume of testing that we're doing is often so huge that this test eats up however many million members, and therefore the next test can't run until they're done. And then so they're sitting there going like, when is your test done? I need to turn mine on, like, come on, right? And then so we had that problem of like pacing and sequencing a little bit. And so us being in the middle are trying to think about, okay, for those types of tests, how do we make it easier so that their scheduling is easier, right? And then for this other type of tests, how do we make it so, you're analyzing at the correct unit of measurement that you're actually, testing on. And so we're kind of in the middle of saying like, maybe we should come up with some good practices, maybe, I don't know, throwing bootstrapping at everything for you guys. Have you tried these other types of things, right? So we have a very open contribution culture on our platform where people can contribute their own metrics, their own stats models, all of those things. And so we want to let the data scientists have that room to explore and to put in their different ideas about like maybe this is better, maybe this QPED is better than that covariate adjustment, and give them the place to go and try those out on the same tests to see like is this actually better or worse. So giving them a lot of flexibility, but ultimately coming back to my other point of like there's too much flexibility sometimes, right? So sometimes we have to be like, okay, you can do all those things, but like what are we actually promoting to the platform for general use, right? And so trying to have an opinion or a stance, sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. So that's a fine line to walk.
Yeah, super interesting. I'm cognizant of time, so I want to ask two more questions one of which will be kind of like a lightning round question, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So I think we have mic runners that are ready to go, and people can start kind of ideating on questions they want to ask. One thing I'm curious about is we don't often have designers at Code. This is kind of like a new thing for us, and I'm curious. Not all of you have to answer this question if you don't have an answer, but like having gone to all of the different talks, like particularly the method talks and things like that, like if there was anything that jumped out to you as someone that thinks about designing these tools where you were like, oh, that would be really interesting to implement, or like, wow, like, our users could never even fathom doing that in an experiment. Just like, how does all of the content that people are working on here kind of land with you as someone that's building tools for people that actually have to maybe use these methods that people are talking about?
Go.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So it has been quite interesting to see that there's been a lot of focus on how we can experiment or run experiments on LLM models. That's something that that was quite interesting to see that today.
Yeah, seems like a very emerging area. I actually want to ask about that in a minute. So more on that in a moment. Yeah, Joni.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by a couple of things. The first one, kind of completely unrelated to your question, but a lot of times when I'm looking at the experiments that were run or shared from papers, I'm always curious about what happened after. Did anybody actually do anything with that? And that's just kind of the designer in me, I suppose, but also somebody who builds an experimentation platform. I'm always curious about what happens after you ran the experiment. Did you do the thing that you said you were going to do? Did you actually use the learnings? So that's something that I've been thinking about. And then, yeah, I mean, obviously looking at some of the, I think some of the stuff coming from Netflix that I saw earlier today around Bayesian inference, I personally couldn't see a lot of my customers, my users, at that particular level of maturity today. But it is exciting to think about what experimentation platforms look like in 5 years, in 10 years, when that level of maturity or expertise becomes more democratized. Is that something that I have to start paying attention to as a designer? Is something that I sort of think about, and how would I embed that into a platform that's meant to be used by many different kinds of users or many different kinds of companies? So it just has me thinking, I think, in those ways.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, not that Bayesian inference is a new technology per se, but to manufacture a segue into my last question.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of talk about LLMs. Like here, I think there's some talks about experimenting on LLMs, but I think also there's excitement around maybe using LLMs, obviously to synthesize information. I have a piece coming out with Martin Tingley, who's here, and a couple of other folks in a couple of months, talking about the potential of AI co-pilots that sit on top of experiment data and help people kind of like mine insights from, if not tons of experiments, maybe individual experiments. I guess I'm curious what you all think about, what's kind of the next frontier for experimentation platforms? How might new technologies like AI get integrated into the design of experimentation platforms moving forward? Just kind of like, what does the experimentation platform in 5 or 10 years look like, and what new technologies is it using? I don't know if people want to be speculative and throw out some thoughts or ideas.
Yeah, hopefully we're recording so that 5 years from now we can all be proven wrong. I can bogart the mic, but maybe if somebody else wants to throw in, they can.
I'm just thinking about all the manual things that data scientists do today that maybe you can feed into an LLM and have it run, go run all these simulations for me instead of me having to do it. Like, does that make your life easier? With all the caveats that were mentioned, like the thing might hallucinate, right? You have to know how to craft the prompt that you're feeding into it so it's actually giving you the right thing. Given all of those constraints, then, like, where can you use it? Like, can you leverage hallucinations to make more interesting and more diverse experimentation ideas, right? The actual contents of the experiments. Should you just use LLMs to be like, I just want to test this, write me the memo, right? Write the description afterwards so that I don't have to sit there and talk about it. I think there's many ways you could use it, but to me it's always like a balance between how accurate is it going to be? Because that's one thing in all of this experimentation, like all the stats we're all doing is it has to be accurate, right, at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I would add is, I think the brainstorming space, such as like brainstorming a good hypothesis, and summarizing space, such as like summarizing the learnings from an experiment or even across experiments, right? Mm-hmm. I think an obvious thing. I think further ahead, what I believe is that UI would not be the same type of UI today, because how we design interface is that we imagine what the right experience is, and then we design one experience for everybody. I think the magic of AI is you can, in theory, generate the right UI for the level of expertise of a certain user. So say maybe if I'm a data scientist and I'm open to seeing a long list of all of the values, the UI know that, and it would show me that without me having to ask, right? Or if I'm a PM, it can adapt to the kind of things that I care about, or like the metrics that I'm responsible for. And then it tell me like, hey, this thing is great, but you're not hitting your goals, whatever that would be. And so I think in that sense, interface is fluid, and it's almost like you have a mega experiment going on all at the same time. It's like a mega bandit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
Where like it's optimizing the interface for the person. And I think that's let's say the best case user experience for everybody, because you're not optimizing for one person. You're optimizing for, it's personalized.
Everybody, yeah.
For everybody.
Totally. Antara, did you have a?
Sure, yeah. So when I think of LLM models on experimentation, it could be that in future, let's say an organization has a set of metrics, and maybe this LLM model can suggest new metrics that might be more useful or impactful to see if they are making progress in the right direction. but then again, like I would also be skeptical about those metrics because the training data is only from that sort of like user group. What about the other training data, other sort of data that might, the other other people who might be using different metrics? So, so it's not entirely like, okay, it's going to be, yes, obviously there's going to be lots of use cases, but with a hint of skepticism.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think hopefully the skepticism will kind of recede as we get more familiar with these tools, but I think there will always be some element of that.
Can I add? So big skeptic over here of AI and LLMs. But we actually did a prototype similar to a couple of the pieces which were discussed. So one of the prototypes, the first one that we built, was giving this sense that you've got a data scientist sitting right next to you, helping you to interpret the results. It's a great thing for a large language model to be able to do. We haven't shipped it, but it is something that we've been playing around with. And then there was another one that we built, which was kind of a helper as you're designing an experiment to help you, once you input what your hypothesis is, what is the metric that you might choose if it's already existent in your system? What is the flag? We use feature flagging, so what's the flag that you might use to do this? And then maybe some suggestions about like how you could use that flag and actually generate variations. So if, for the very basic example is, I'm a growth marketer and I'm trying to figure out what the right button text is to use, can I get a large language model to generate different variations based on the examples that I provided it? And these are just kind of like what I would call kind of low level, pretty basic, pretty known. But the things that I've been thinking about are more like, how do we get AI to make connections between experiments within a system? That seems really interesting, and there's some interesting potential there. Again, obviously, it's related to how accurate it can be, but like, can it help to, one of the things that I've found within user research is that AI can be really helpful in synthesis of findings. And so in this way, could it be helpful in synthesis of experiment results and suggesting additional experiments from there? That could be a potential use that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I find this stuff super exciting.
Yeah,
All right, let's open it up for questions in the audience. We're a little short on time for questions, so I'm going to steal a couple of minutes from the closing remarks because there's not that much to say at the end of code. But also maybe if folks can direct their questions to one or two folks on the panel just so that we don't have to like, have 4 answers to every question. So I think there are mic runners out and about. It looks like there's some hands up, so we just need to match the mics to the hands, and then we should be off to the races. Is there someone who has a mic back here? Yeah.
Yeah. We've just been talking about using an AI to generate potential flags, metrics, etc. for a stated hypothesis. I'm aware of at least one startup that's doing perhaps the inverse, not quite the inverse operation, but using an AI to generate potential to generate hypotheses to explain an observed phenomenon in the data. Do you have any experience with anything like that, or any ideas or comments?
No, I don't. I can say that I don't. We actually used our hypothesis as effectively kind of the prompt. So that was what we were exploring. We didn't really explore hypothesis generation. I haven't seen that. So.
Yeah. Is there another mic that's out there already? Yeah. Go ahead.
I had a question. So, for the changes that you make to the platform, do you have a way of measuring if that was better for users?
Yeah, it's called experimentation.
I was curious. Do you experiment on the platform itself?
100%, yeah.
And I guess the leading question was, what metric do you define for saying an experience was overall better for users?
That an experience. Sorry. That an experience was
better for you? Is it, for example, just the execution time, or is it like how much they explore the tool and so on?
Oh, yeah. Maybe.
You go ahead.
Okay. So we look at first is, do people use the thing that we made? So that's adoption. And then do people go back to the thing that we made? Right, is retention. And as a whole, the good thing about selling a platform is we'll know if people are happy 1 year later. If they continue paying us, they're happy. So it's like, on the long-term scale, that's how we know that people are happy. But on a short term, it would be mainly, Are they doing the thing? Are they converting? As in like from the first step to the last step? Are they coming back? Is how we know.
Yeah, I guess one question I would have to like piggyback on that question though is like, there's a question of usage, but then I assume for some of these things where it's like, we want people to be making more informed, better decisions around the data. That's a little bit thornier.
Yeah, then those are more. And to be clear, when we talk about, are people happy, there's the quantitative side of it, which is the, numbers. And then there's the deeper qualitative side, as in, sure, people did it, but were they frustrated going through it, right? Or like, were they like, hey, this thing is really cool, I want to use it again. And there's like, you don't know until you talk to them. So like we also, yeah, of course, there's the getting feedback and all of that.
Yeah, maybe I can give just a recent example. We're changing our metric creation workflow with the goal that it is, quote, easier or more intuitive for users. The primary metric that we're using there is time to completion. So yeah, there's always, I think metrics are challenging for everybody, the choice of them, but that's a very concrete and specific example that we've used recently.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Anand.
Hi, okay, great. Yeah, I'm actually I was the presenter on the using LLMs for science data generation this morning. So I really enjoyed that last set of questions from the panel. But I guess I wanted to ask something more specifically on Rina. I think you mentioned that, right now users are kind of the scarce resource in some sense on a platform when you're trying to test out new features. And I was just kind of curious right now, how do designers think about kind of the trade-offs or prioritizing which features they want to test before or after other ones, especially given they may be, features that target completely different parts of the product. So it's kind of hard to find complementarities to something.
So you're talking about the actual experiments that are run on our platform?
Yeah. How do you guys decide,
I'm not privy to those conversations because I work on the actual platform. So we actually have no hand in what experiments are run on our platform. But as far as I know, each set of programs, like let's say somebody's working on the TV and the experience on there, they have their own OKRs, their own goals of what they're trying to achieve. And so whatever they're trying to do, by let's say the end of the quarter, end of the year, they're going to be designing experiments to get there, right? And so their experimentation, because at the end of the day, they're probably measuring something like retention, right? Or how long people watch. They might have to fight for users, probably not with with other tests that are in this exact same platform. So if iOS is testing something and Android's testing something else, they might not necessarily be a problem there unless it's like a cross-platform messaging kind of a thing. The example I was thinking about was actually an algorithm test. So you really can only run one recommendation algorithm on a set of what we're presenting to you on your profiles at a time, because otherwise, it just doesn't work otherwise. So all your algorithm tests basically have to get in line, and they figure out amongst themselves how much time each of them get. And we're kind of not really involved in it so much.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Someone over here has the microphone.
Yeah, thanks so much for this session, and it's great to have the design perspective, and I think it connects well with the previous session where they talked about continuous experimentation. I guess I want your thoughts on, are we still thinking about experimentation in the wrong old-fashioned way, which is you run an experiment, you learn the truth, and then you put it into practice? Because think about a landing page or website. We might run an experiment, but sometimes we want to reincarnate them or bring them back. And I wonder fundamentally, do we need to get people thinking, really, when you make a decision, what's the probability that A versus B is better in this context for this user? And then maybe you all have creative ideas how it doesn't just have to be a machine learning algorithm doing that. It can be qualitative experiments. It can be expert judgment. But how do we get people away from run experiment, know the truth, to, well, what is the probability this is the best thing now? When should we bring things back? When should we get qualitative data? How do we kind of continuously keep testing things out like a landing page?
Antara, it looks like you have thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's always a good balance to have quantitative data and qualitative data to measure what the changes that you're making are actually effective. And with qualitative data, you can always run user interviews or usability sessions, observe people who are actually using the landing page or the UI that you have made, and see how are they able to complete the task, are they able to understand why they are on that page, and there are different techniques like Microsoft Clarity is a very good tool that helps you measure heat maps. You can see different places where the user is clicking more. That will be highlighted in red. Other parts will be highlighted in green, the ones that are not clicked more. The other tool could be eye tracking. Like you can measure, see how the eyes are moving from one area of the page to the other area. So along with, yes, it's a part of a balance of both qualitative and quantitative. So hyper-reliance on just quantitative data is good, but then it's always good to have some sort of qualitative feedback to actually see how humans who are actually going to use this landing page, how do they feel about this experience?
I'm curious if any of you know of tools, or if you've worked on tools that try to bring the quantitative and qualitative data for a given intervention together. Because in my experience in tech before I was an academic, these were two very distinct sort of siloed research functions that didn't really interact. And I think to this question, it's very easy to just only pay attention to one and then sort of ignore the other. You can imagine a more evolved experimentation dashboard that right next to the effects on metrics showed some of the qualitative insights that were collected during user research or something like that.
I think that's a really amazing idea. I think one of the things that I've observed with the LaunchDarkly platform is that for a long time we've largely shared stats. The likelihood or the probability a thing is going to be better. But a lot of our users saying that's just not enough. It feels like a black box to me. I want more. They're saying maybe product analytics, or I think about how I use my tools as a user researcher or user experience designer, and I'm always using these adjunct tools, right? So whether it be session replay or usertesting.com, they always are in addition to the experimentation tool, not used just independently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure many of us in the audience can sympathize with getting some experiment results that look too good to be true or something, and then you go digging around in the data or look at some, do something more qualitative, and you realize that there's something happening in the data that's driving what you see. And so it sort of suggests that these dashboards should not be the end-all be-all.
Yeah, it's this natural sort of, I have some information, now I want more information.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Is there
I have a.
Okay, great.
So you talked a little bit about how having different personas of people using the platform. You have the novice, you have the more data scientist or expert. When do you make the decision of keeping all the keeping all the personas on one surface versus deciding to fork your platform into one product maybe for mature customers versus another product for more novices? And I think I know a little bit about Microsoft, but I'm interested also as well, when you're offering a service, would you have two different offerings for different products or different personas?
Well, I mean, I think the easy answer is when the market demands. But the hard part is what is enough market demand, and how do you pay attention to that, and when do you make that choice? I don't have a good answer for that necessarily, but I can say that we are starting to see higher demand for warehouse native, for example. And so this isn't necessarily a bifurcated or a different product. It just means that we're expanding our offering because the market has demanded. That is, competitors are doing it, like Eppo, Statsig, others are doing it, but also the customers that are coming to us want it badly enough and are telling us that they will pay for it. So, I mean, that's one indicator, I think.
Yeah, another thing I would also make the difference between the buyer, who's the person signing the check,
Yeah.
right? In a deal, there is one buyer.
Yeah.
So I would say we don't want the experience of the user being overly influenced by the pricing model.
Totally.
And a product can be designed that is specific for each of the user. Because the user, when they use it, they're not like, oh, I paid $500K for these two products, whatever. But the buyer cares that they have a holistic pricing and packaging. So it's not the same decision, for sure.
Rina, curious what this looks like inside of Netflix.
Yeah, because basically nobody has to buy our product. It's just kind of like built in, right?
Yeah.
I think when we decide to fork or like give somebody a different surface really has to do with how much pain they're experiencing, how like the impact it has on them and how many of them there are. Sometimes it's like, well, we have 6 data scientists who really want to do this thing on a feature branch. And we're like, we know all of you. We talk to all of you. Here's your ability to go and run this Python script and go get your data and put in this data frame and do it in a notebook and like come back to us with your results and we can talk about it because we know exactly who those people are. And other times it's going to be like, well, it's you've got people who really don't know any stats and they just want the red and green colors, right? And then you've got the layer down from there of, well, I know that is red and green, but where is it red and green, right? And so building in something like HTE into that so they can figure out, it's, by country, like who's going to dig into that, right? And at what point are you going to say, that's a feature that so many people are going to use. We're going to just build it into that, even though it provides slightly more complexity than maybe what we want. Maybe you have a page that's just purely focused on the scorecard. Back to the scorecard. Scorecard part of it is like this treatment won, right? Or this treatment is the one you should launch. Maybe you should replicate it again just to ensure like that one is still the winner. But more or less we're saying that this is the one. And if you want to dig down into the reasons why, here you can click on this and like now you can go in deep diving, right? While knowing that now our stats aren't as great because you're doing multiple correction or multiple hypotheses right here. But like there's certainly a balance of like what do we have time to focus on, right? And what's going to give the biggest impact to our users.
Cool. I think we have time for one more very quick question. Yeah, let's go here.
It's on.
Oh, okay. I have one question. So I'm leading experimentation platform team at DoorDash. So I'm really curious to know from Panelist, what's your vision of feature flag versus experimentation? On one hand, I know a lot of engineers, they prefer feature flag, easy to turn on, don't need to give inputs. On the other hand, a lot of people worried feature flag doesn't measure impact. A lot of people advocate we should A/B testing everything. If you drive in San Francisco today, you can see a lot of billboards even writing, do experiment, don't launch feature flag or something. What's your viewpoints on that?
Well, I guess I can go because LaunchDarkly is the target of many of those billboards, I think. But I don't think that it's either or, honestly. I think one of the ways that we've always thought about the value of experimentation with feature management is that it's not like a duplicative effort for engineers to then have to do something that their marketing team sort of had put together. This is the Optimizely approach where it's kind of a skin on top and then the engineering team has to go out and do it. This is what the category is now. The category is no longer feature management. It's feature management and experimentation. So I don't know if that's really addressing the question. I think it's just very logical that you would use feature flags as a way of delivering the variations in the experiments that you wish to run.
All right, I'm sure that could be a longer conversation. Yeah. I have not seen these billboards, so I need to pay less attention to the road when I'm driving and more attention to the billboards, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, so to wrap up the day, just want to make a few quick announcements. So once again, want to thank all of our sponsors. So our premier sponsor, Netflix, our event sponsors, Amazon, Booking.com, and StatSig, and also the reception sponsor, Eppo. You can, again, visit the sponsor room right over here. If you're looking for a job, there are job opportunities aplenty in the sponsor room. There's also fun swag and fun conversations as well. So please stop by there at some point during code. A couple of quick reminders. We're going to have a reception now, so you'll have a chance to view all of the posters, not just the half that were presented today, but all of them. So some we heard from today, the rest we will hear from at lunch tomorrow. Poster presenters, if you're in the room, please go stand by your posters so that you can answer all of the amazing questions that will be asked of you. Also, leave those posters up so they're already there for tomorrow. And tomorrow, the doors open at 8 a.m. for breakfast. Our first plenary is going to start at 9 a.m. sharp. And we're going to have Avi Kallis from Carnegie Mellon and Jessica Holman from Northwestern, who actually does really interesting work on data visualization and things like communicating uncertainty. So a lot of interesting overlaps with the topics that we've been discussing in this panel. So super excited for those talks tomorrow and everything else that's happening. So thank you again, everybody, for being here, and looking forward to the reception and the rest of the conference. So thanks again to our panelists also.
Thank you. Thank you.